we're going to tell the story of Joseph and why Genesis 2050 doesn't support compatibilism today on exegeting Calvinism and Provisionism. Greetings, welcome back to Exegeting Calvinism and Provisionism. My name is Michael Faber, your exegetical guide, and yes, I've changed the channel name. I've added and Provisionism because we are a pro-provisionist channel, even as we do with exegetical issues in Calvinism. So I will be expanding my content a little bit to include both. But not to worry, we will continue to tell stories like we are today about Calvinist proof texts. Before we get started, make sure you hit the like button and hit the subscribe button so you get all of my content. And comment below as to how you think compatibilism does or doesn't fit into Genesis 50:20. And so without further ado, the story of Joseph and why Genesis 50:20 doesn't support compatibilism. So Joseph is born in Genesis 30. So this is before Jacob leaves Laban. So if you remember, after deceiving Esau, Esau wanted to kill Jacob, and so Jacob ran off to live with his uncle Laban, and labored for him for, I believe, 21 years in order to get the right wife. And we can see, even up to this point, that Jacob's mother and Jacob have been pretty devious in bringing about this gaining of the birthright that God promised to Jacob. So we already know what Jacob is about. So while he's there, Jacob basically breaks Laban economically with animal husbandry. You can read the story, but effectively Jacob takes all of the healthy lambs that are spotted and speckled for himself and makes sure that the striped and the black lambs are sickly and leaves those for Laban. And Laban kind of gets word of this. And so Jacob apparently packs up everything he owns and leaves at night when nobody's looking. So once again, devious animal husbandry followed by a devious leaving. Not a great look for Jacob. And then we have Jacob wrestles with God. God injures his hip, of course, at this point. Jacob reunites with Esau, and that's apparently a reconciliation moment. Esau seems to be okay with what's going on. And then we have the story of Dinah, where the men of Shechem violate Dinah, and Simeon and Levi get revenge. Let's just leave it at that. So we have Genesis 31 through 36, where Joseph is not mentioned. He's born, but he's not mentioned at all. So that's, I guess, we basically have a three-part story with Joseph. So to think of Joseph's story as kind of one sort of back-to-back, one thing that happens at one time, it really isn't. It's three pieces that happen. And so Jacob's renamed Israel at this point. And then Joseph is 17 in chapter 37. So all of the stuff that happened after he was born, with the animal husbandry and leaving and getting together with Esau and everything else, happens in a period of about 17 years. That's one thing that we kind of draw from this. So the first thing that happens is we know that Jacob favors Joseph over the rest of his brothers, and his brothers already know that, but then Jacob gives Joseph a Technicolor Dreamcoat. And now the brothers are even more bitter and resentful of Joseph because obviously his father favors him over them. Jacob might even be neglecting them in favor of Joseph at times. We know that when Joseph is sent to the fields, well, his brothers were already tending the sheep, and Joseph wasn't. So, and then of course Joseph has dreams. He has two different dreams, where the interpretation is basically that his father and his mother and his other brothers are going to bow down to him. And of course, this makes things worse. The brothers, of course, are indignant. That might be a kind word. But they're clearly, not happy, and maybe justifiably so. I mean, once again, Jacob is acting somewhat, at least with this lack of self-awareness, if not in a somewhat devious manner, because he's favoring one son over the rest. Now, granted, it's the son of the woman that he loved, and so the family dynamic is there, and yet Jacob is not acting with integrity towards all of his children. I think we can say that pretty clearly. And so the brothers are mad enough that they plot to kill him. That's pretty serious. Obviously, Jacob has really made them angry. And Joseph's actions as a petulant young man have poured fuel on that fire, and they're done. They don't want anything to do with him anymore. But then they throw him into a pit and think, well, we're just going to let him die there. And then they see the slave train, and they say, hey, let's sell him into slavery. That way, his blood's not on our hands. And so they sell him into slavery, and they return to Jacob with a blood-stained coat, the multicolored coat, so that Jacob thinks that Joseph has died. And of course, not a very nice thing to do. So we can see there's a lot of family drama and deviousness and such in Jacob's family, as is inherited from Jacob and his mother, obviously enough. So then we have an interlude with Judah and Tamar. Now, is this intended to break up the story into two stories? That may be the case in part, because why would you stop it here? Joseph sent off into slavery, and that's it? That's the end? And obviously the Jews are going to know the story, and so they'll be expecting to come back to it. But there's a break in the story here. Judah and Tamar is about how Judah's oldest sons died, and his next son was supposed to have children through Tamar for his older brother and refused, and he died. And then the next older brother was supposed to do the same and said that he would, and then didn't, and he died. And Judah had one other son who was basically too young to be engaged in that kind of activity. And so Judah said, well, wait till he comes of age, and then you can have children through him. Well, this young man came of age and was of age long enough that Tamar recognized that Judah wasn't going to keep his word in this matter, and that enough time passed that Tamar found the right circumstance from which to extract from Judah what was rightfully hers. And so this is a period of, 5 years? 10 years? For this story, this is not a quick story. The younger brother has to come of age, and then there has to be time passed for Tamar to realize this, and then to set up the plan. So this is not just a quick, this is a few days interlude of what happened. These are years that are happening. Now, are these years that Joseph was in slavery? Why is this story here? And I think the obvious answer is that Moses wants to break the story up into 3 parts. So we'll get back to that a little bit later. But there are three distinct pieces to the story in Genesis. Then chapters 39 through 41, I think, can be titled "The Lord Was with Him." So Joseph is sold into slavery to Potiphar. The Lord was with Joseph and showed him favor, and rose to basically being head of Potiphar's household, and that drew the attention of Potiphar's wife, who wanted to have sex with him, and he said no and ran off, but left his tunic behind because she was hanging onto it, and then she used that to accuse Joseph of attacking her, and he was thrown into prison. Great start. So Joseph, when he's imprisoned, interprets 2 dreams for 2 fellow prisoners. Both were servants of Pharaoh. He told one of them they were going to be put to death, and the other one was going to be restored. And to the one who was going to be restored, he said, remember me when you get there. So Joseph, he remembers. Pharaoh calls for him. Joseph interprets the dream for Pharaoh and is made the second in command. So what's God's involvement here? Well, God gave favor with him in each of the circumstances where he was. God interpreted 3 dreams for him, and then Joseph ends up in the place where God wants him to preserve Jacob and his family. But Joseph has a lot to do in here too. I mean, he has to sort of man up, not only do the things God wants him to do, but act with integrity and all of those kinds of things as well. So now chapter 42, the brothers are sent to Egypt. The famine begins. And Jacob says, go to Egypt, buy some grain, sends money with them. And they get there, and Joseph accuses them of being spies. And they say, no, 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 we're spies. We have a father and a younger brother. And we have a story back and forth. And what ends up happening is Joseph says Simeon is to be thrown into jail. And the rest of you go home and bring back the brother. Now, is Joseph being devious here? Yeah, I think so. I think he wants to see Benjamin because he misses him, and wants to see his father because he misses them. And so he's willing to put his brothers through quite a bit of torture to make this happen. So he takes one of his own brothers, doesn't tell them who he is, and just throws him in jail, sends the rest of them home. Now, he's not without some grace, as the money that they paid for the grain with was put in the sacks with the grain. If we read the rest of the story of Egypt, the Egyptians actually wind up losing all of their wealth and giving it all to the Pharaoh, because the grain that was collected for 7 years during the times of plenty are then sold back to the Egyptians during the time of few, and they ran out of money. And so they sold their cattle, they sold their lands, some of them even sold their children to Pharaoh to pay for grain so they could feed themselves. Yeah, the government basically took stuff away from them and then sold it back to him. Let's not go there. Anyway, so when they get home, and Jacob refuses to send Benjamin back. He says, I've already lost 2 sons. I'm not going to risk my last beloved youngest son. But apparently Benjamin was something of a favorite, but was more of a more tolerated by the older brothers than Joseph was, apparently. Either that or Jacob learned his lesson. Okay, now chapter 42. Do you see God involved here? God's not involved in doing any of this. God's not mentioned. This is just Joseph acting somewhat deviously, but somewhat generously with his brothers. So, is he torturing them because they acted deviously towards him? Doesn't suggest that, but I mean, why else is Joseph going to act the way that he does, to have one of his brothers thrown into jail and send the rest of them home and tell them to bring their younger brother with them? It's certainly not the best way to interact with your family, even if they did try to kill you. So the famine gets worse. They need more food. So they go back to Egypt, this time with Benjamin. And Joseph sees them and of course is happy to see them. And so he hosts a party at his house. Doesn't reveal who he is, but the brothers are treated very generously. There's no Egyptians there because Egyptians apparently don't eat with Hebrews for some reason. So Joseph winds up actually serving the dinner. But the point is that Joseph is now treating them at least a little bit better, and then sends them home with the grain. But the money that they brought was back in their sacks again, and actually Joseph's silver cup was also brought there as well. But then he sends men after them and calls them back. Now, again, this is Joseph being a little bit mean, and thinking we're going to be sent to prison, we're going to be accused falsely. And he knows all of this. Joseph knows all this when he sends them with the money. So again, the deviousness of Joseph kind of comes out in dealing with his brothers. Family drama. What are you going to do? And then we get to chapter 45. And Joseph reveals himself. And then he says, for the famine has been in the land these 2 years. And there are still 5 years in which there will be neither plowing nor harvesting. So God sent me ahead of you to ensure for you a remnant on the earth and to keep you alive by a great deliverance. So up to this point, how does God send Joseph ahead? Well, God uses Jacob's deviousness, his favoritism towards Joseph, to make the brothers mad enough to send him off into slavery. And then from slavery to being where he is. So this is what God sent me ahead of you means. Okay, is this compatibilism? Doesn't sound like it, but we'll come back to that. So chapters 46 to 49, Israel moves to Egypt and dies. They go to bury him back in the land of Israel, and then they settle back in the land of Egypt. And then chapter 50 is kind of the aftermath. Okay, we're told about the funeral. And then chapter 50, verse 15, when Joseph's brothers had seen that their father was dead, they said, "What if Joseph holds a grudge against us and pays us back in full for all the wrong which we did to him?" So they sent instructions to Joseph, saying, "Your father commanded us before he died, saying, 'This is what you shall say to Joseph. Please forgive, I beg you, the offense of your brothers and their sin, for they did wrong to you. And now please forgive the offense of the servants of the God of your father.'" Well, here's more of that deviousness, because Jacob never said any such thing. They were trying to appeal to the Jacob, who had just died, to try and get Joseph to believe that he wanted them to forgive them, because they weren't sure that Joseph wasn't going to turn on them now that Jacob was dead. And, I mean, you can understand why they did this, but at the same time, family drama, lots of deviousness in this family. It's a thing. "And Joseph wept when they spoke to him. And then his brothers also came and fell down before him and said, 'Behold, we are your servants.' But Joseph said to them, 'Do not be afraid, for am I in God's place?'" Apparently Joseph had developed some maturity, some relationship with God, to say, "We'll just let God judge you. How's that?" Not sure that was a comfort, but at least they knew that Joseph wasn't going to be taking revenge on them from his position in Egypt. "As for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, in order to bring about this present result, to keep many people alive. Therefore do not be afraid. I will provide for you and your little ones." So he comforted them and spoke kindly to them. Now, is Joseph espousing compatibilism here? Doesn't sound like it. He's comforting his brothers, saying, "Don't worry about it. God kind of brought some of this about so that you'd be safe, and I'm not gonna mess with that." So, again, the story here is that God's minimal involvement brought about this end. Okay? So, questions to be asked. Does this story lend itself to compatibilism? It really doesn't, because compatibilism would say that God is the one causing all of the things that happened, causing Jacob to treat Joseph as a favorite son over the rest of his brothers, to their chagrin. It would be God controlling the brothers into being angry, and being angry enough to want to kill Joseph, and then selling him into slavery. Okay, so compatibilism means God's controlling every step along the way, even though the brothers are the ones supposedly responsible for their own actions. Okay? Or does this story lend itself to God setting things up? And that seems to be more the case. If we look at where God is involved and where God isn't involved, according to the story, that seems to make more sense. So what is God involved in Joseph being sold into slavery? Indirectly. Again, God using Jacob's favoritism towards Joseph and throwing a couple of dreams at Joseph that, when reported to his brothers, would make them want to kill him. But then at that point, letting the brothers do what the brothers wanted to do. And then, provided with the opportunity to sell them into slavery rather than kill him, they decided to do that. Would imagine that they were dreading, to some extent, having to kill Joseph, because if we look at where murder ranks in terms of Genesis as a whole, it does not end well. And so sending him into slavery was a far better option for them. So, in chapter 45, is Joseph espousing compatibilism? No, he's not. He's comforting his brothers and saying, "It's okay. God sent me ahead in order to save you." And if we look at the things that God actually did, that came about without God having to control everything. So in chapter 50, is Joseph promoting compatibilism? No, once again, he's consoling and comforting his brothers, saying, "Don't worry. This whole thing came about so that everybody would be safe, and everybody's safe. It's cool." Okay? So, God is involved minimally. What does God do? Well, make sure Joseph is born second to the last, effectively. Gives Joseph dreams so that his brothers will be increasingly angry with him and want to kill him. Was God involved in making sure a slave caravan came by and that they knew about it? Maybe. Or it could be that that one just came by every periodically and they knew about it. And when they saw it coming, they said, "Hey, let's have an idea here." God doesn't have to be involved to bring that about. He doesn't have to cause the brothers to do that. They do those things on their own. So the brothers were set up by the dreams in the coat. There's no question about that. And God was involved, at least, in giving Joseph the dreams, assuming that Joseph is going to be his petulant 17-year-old self and report it to his brothers and make them more angry. And you know how younger brothers can be at times. They'll be, ha, 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 and that kind of thing towards older brothers, knowing that the older brothers can't touch him, because if they go after him, then Dad punishes the older brothers, of course. Welcome to family dynamics. So God doesn't need to control them, and God isn't controlling them. The text in no sense suggests that God is controlling them or is the sort of the first cause of their actions. It's simply not necessary. God is wise and powerful enough to bring this about without having to control the actions of the brothers. So all God needed to do was arouse their jealousy. And that's what got Joseph sent into slavery. And the brothers are the ones responsible for that, because it was their jealousy. It was their decision to kill him. It was their decision to send him into slavery. God's not involved in making those decisions for them. They did those all by themselves. And then gave Joseph favor in slavery to rise to the position where he wound up being. And that's what saved Israel. That's what the nation of Israel continues to exist today, is via the story that Joseph was sent into slavery and rose to be the second in command in Egypt, just like we all heard in Sunday school. So there's no need for compatibilism here. The story itself tells us what God's involvement is and tells us what God's involvement isn't. And so we just don't need to insert compatibilism into Genesis 50:20 when we read the entire story of Joseph and how God is involved and how God is not involved. And that's it. That's the end of the video on Genesis 50:20 and why it doesn't support compatibilism. Make sure, again, you hit like and subscribe for all of my content, and comment below as to how you think the story of Joseph shakes out and how it ends in Genesis 50. My name is Michael Faber, and this is HGD Calvinism and Provisionism, and we will see you next time.